So, Terra is a thing we should probably talk about at this point. Terra got changed in patch 5.6. She got buffed for the most part, and most people would agree that she's definitely pretty buff right now. There were two major changes. One was the return of her root, Monolith, being back with its rooting capabilities instead of a slow, which was very frequently demanded by the community. But at the end, she already saw competitive play when she had the slow again, so it's not like she was terrible. This video is just gonna be full of puns. But Hi-Rez thought that she needed more changes and buffs, and I can understand why especially the other change was done. The other change was new ultimate, Earthen Fury. Terra channels her strength into the world around her, buffing her allies and debuffing enemies for 10 seconds. Allies gain a 10% damage mitigation as well as a heal over time and protective stones that heal the ally if all 4 are activated. Enemies receive 10% more damage from our sources and harmful stones that damage the enemy if all 4 are activated. Stones are activated when an ally or enemy takes damage. Radius 55 feet, heal over time 5 to 17, plus 2% of your magical power every 0.5 seconds for 10 seconds, heal 100 to 300, plus 30% of your magical power, damage 200 to 400, plus 60% of your magical power, cooldown 90 seconds, mana cost 100 mana. A lot of stats here, a lot of things going on, much like with the old ultimate, by the way, which also had a ridiculous bloat of stats. The biggest difference here out of all the differences is that it's now limited in its range. Previously it was a global ultimate, now it is a AoE radius of 55 feet instead. And this range change in particular is what makes this understandable. Hi-Rez simply wanted to have a way to make this ability more balanced for fights and close range engagements rather than being global, because global abilities in general are very, very hard to balance. Global passives like the one of Nike are hard to balance and give her a very high win rate, even though she as a character usually performs very poorly in lane. Then you have characters like Noir who are somewhat hard to balance and either are way too weak or way too strong most of the time. Because again, global ults just do so much for your team, and it's sometimes not an obvious direct impact, but an indirect impact that especially on higher levels of play will be game changing. Hi-Rez also stated that they would look at the ultimate very closely and the abilities in general, and depending on how the performance would be at later stages, would nerf or buff it. And that is the part why we're talking about it today mostly. I was kind of expecting a nerf even before the ability leaves PTS, or Terra leaves PTS in that state. That didn't happen. Then I was thinking, okay, maybe they want to give it a little bit more time, a little bit more play, and we would see the nerf at patch 5.7. That didn't happen. I'm not exactly on track on when the competitive games are played on which patches, but if it continues like this, we will eventually have this Terra as a god in competitive. And if we have this Terra as a god in competitive, we'll probably not see too much of her anyways, because she will probably be banned most of the time. While she no longer has as much of a global presence, her new ultimate may arguably be the best tower pushing as well as team fighting and objective controlling ultimate in the game. To see that a little better, let's break down these stats one by one. First of all, I'm gonna have the old ultimate here with its base values and scaling where applicable, and then next to that we'll have the new ultimate with the base values and the scaling. The old ultimate had a base heal of up to 300 if all 4 stones were broken. It also had 30% scaling. The same thing applies for the new ultimate. That part actually hasn't changed at all. It keeps the same scaling and the same base values, and you will have the same amount of healing just from the broken stones alone. That doesn't mean that the overall heal is the same. But first of all, the damage part. The new ultimate also comes with a damaging part that wasn't on the previous one at all. The damage goes up to 400, and it also has a 60% scaling. That is incredibly high for a defensive guardian for the most part. You have to keep in mind that this ability is supposed to be used in a way where it's applied to at least 2 if not 3 targets in most fighting scenarios. And as such, you will have easily 800 to 1200 base damage across those targets, and you still have 60% scaling, which in a more power focused build can actually be quite a lot. I did some stupid messing about in Arena with this, which you will probably see later in this video, where I just went for a generally damage focused build, and you can actually get some pretty stupid damage numbers out of that. I ended up being second in damage in an arena game. Not that an arena game has any value in that regard and would actually show what a character is capable of, but it's still a bit odd to see a so defense-oriented character, a support that was really a support for the most part, and when played in solo more of a defensive, not dying character, can even put out those kinds of damage numbers, which most other supports or guardians simply can't, with some exceptions. But that's not all in terms of raw numbers. We also have the new heal over time, which wasn't even on the old ultimate. And this should not be underestimated because it actually adds up to more than the heal from breaking the stones. So even if your enemies choose to completely ignore you, you will still heal for quite a drastic amount now. You will heal for up to 340 from the ticks of the base scaling, and then we'll also scale for a total of 40%. We'll look at what that translates to in-game numbers with different builds in a bit. Let's first talk about the rest of the stats. So we have damage mitigation on the new ultimate, 10% for all your teammates. So even if the enemy team chooses to aggress, they will not only be possibly punished by taking damage themselves, healing your allies more, and then on top of that they also have to deal more damage because you also give them damage mitigation. And don't underestimate how much 10% damage mitigation can really do in many situations. Likewise, there's also a 10% damage increase on the enemies, which is also incredibly strong. In fact, so strong that it takes a non-basic attack focused guard, namely Amaterasu, 3 basic attacks on a single target to apply the same effect to that target. On one target, not possibly a whole team. This part alone means that if the enemy team is ever clustered up a little bit too much, they can all risk taking huge amounts of damage from anything that follows after this ultimate. Especially if you have another character that can kind of group the enemies and then you throw the Terra ult into a Poseidon Kraken or something like Xingtian or maybe Cerberus, you can go for ridiculous damage spikes and complete annihilations. The old ultimate had a decent amount more safety with 20 to 40% CDR, 20% movement speed and 100% mana cost reduction for all allies, and also obviously being global. But in terms of teamfight aggression, the new ultimate beats the old one anytime. The only thing that can really stop a Terra ult from functioning now is if your team doesn't emphasize on it. If the team doesn't engage after Terra ult happens, then obviously it's wasted. But as long as they utilize that in the slightest, there's almost no chance of them losing the fight as long as the team is not terribly behind at that point. 10 seconds is also an incredibly long duration for an ability like this, with the cooldown also being reduced to 90 seconds from the previous 110 seconds. So you can use this very, very often, pretty much in every bigger fight. But let's look at the actual healing values as well, because I thought this was interesting in terms of what you want to build on Terra. Now, I didn't look too much into solo builds in this context, but rather into support builds. But with slight adjustments, you could also use this as a solo build. It wouldn't really change much because typically you don't have much more room for power outside of that. So the builds I compared were both viable support builds, one that utilizes Traveler's Shoes and otherwise you just build your typical defense items such as Gauntlet of Thebes, Sovereignty, Hardwood Amulet, Spear of the Magus, whichever you want, like just your normal defense choices. And the other build was one that would include Shoes of Focus instead for a little bit more cooldown reduction, Jade Emperor's Crown for a little bit of power instead of Sovereignty, and Rod of Asclepius for a lot more power and an additional healing increase for in-combat healing, which is 25%. In the 20 power build, you would heal for 306 with 4 stones in either of both situations, new or old. But you would also deal another 412 damage if you had the new version. And you would also get a 348 heal over time. That means the total healing with the old ultimate would be 306. With the new ultimate, it would be 654. Quite a decent chunk there that you would have to consider already. And this is just the healing from the ultimate. This does not include the 3. And then we also have the other option with more power and Rod of Asclepius. With 150 power and Asclepius, the old build would heal for 431. Same thing with the new build, obviously, again, just from the stones alone. You would deal 490 damage with the new build, which is already a pretty high amount of damage in my opinion, you know. Almost 500 damage before penetration against 2 to 3 targets or more. And then you would also have 500 healing just from the heal over time alone. That means in the new build, you would heal for 931 just from the ultimate. And this is definitely not some sort of insane, impossible build. This is completely manageable. Even if you take out 20 power here or there, it would still be fine. Just Shoes of Focus alone and Rod of Asclepius would get you almost these numbers. And that to me is very scary, because across the whole team, that is very close to 5,000 healing if you have everyone clustered up. Throw in your 3 and you will definitely get above 1,000. Even if there are no enemies around and you just need to heal up in another situation around an objective, you can still get a total of 2,500 healing with this build out of your ultimate. And that is again outside of all the other benefits this ultimate has. Damage mitigation is super good, damage increase is super good. You could literally leave away the heal over time and it would probably still be a very, very strong ultimate. You could leave away the damage and it would still be a very, very strong ultimate. This ultimate has so much and is so scary right now that it can pretty much decide matches on its own as long as your team is able to follow up and understands that. If you end up actually having a Terra on your team for once at the moment, please go in when she uses her ultimate. And also, as much as I enjoy playing Terra right now, and I enjoy playing her in support even, I think this is not okay. I think Terra needs some decent nerfs to her ultimate very, very soon in order to be, well, more on an even ground with other gods again, because as much as Hyris tried to balance her, she just turned out completely overwhelming. Then again, compared to before, I think she will be easier to balance, and that is the big upside here. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you enjoyed this video and you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth,